Alright, tēnā koutou katoa, tarofa lava, and welcome everybody to our Strategy and Advocacy Committee workshop, the Parks and Reserve Strategic Landholdings Review. And a warm welcome to those that are from the public and the media, as well, and to our officers and to our elected members. So this workshop, we have a nice detailed workshop paper that each of us have gone through. And then I'm just going to pass this on to Ms. O'Neill.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, Councillor Hannah. So today's workshop is the Parks and Reserve Landholdings, which is following on from the previous open spaces and recreation session that we had in our last strategy and advocacy workshop session, and we'll follow on to the reserves management plan. Of note is that the Parks and Reserves remained Council's highest rated service in the previous year's resident satisfaction survey, so there's a great deal of interest and great importance to this, so looking forward to this workshop. Thank you guys.
Good morning, everyone. Just wanted to introduce the rest of the team I've got with me here today. So I've got Lindsay Hyde and Suzanne and Eric Benesbeck. And we've also had a wider working group working through this work to support this. So yeah, just in terms of the purpose of today, why we're here today, we want to show how this links to other work streams which Joe's briefly just touched on. And to look at the considerations officers are starting to work through in terms of looking at the parcels of land that we hold here. If we've got time, we'll look at some preliminary findings around some of this work, but just wanted to make sure that everyone's on board with the process, comfortable with the criteria that we're looking at, and as we proceed into more detail, just make sure that everyone, councillors are comfortable with that approach. And then we'll just touch briefly on how we're proposing to undertake more detailed work at a later date. And community engagement after that. Next slide. So what is the Landholdings Review and why are we doing this work? So essentially, this is a review of every piece of parks and reserves land that council owns, manages or controls. We sort of estimate at the moment, we're working through as we work through more detail, get more clarification, but it's roughly about 220 hectares that we understand that council currently actively manages. There's obviously a lot of other land that's under lease licence and other purpose, but we've got thousands and thousands of hectares of land overall within the parks and reserves in the district. So why now? So I guess over time, our reserves classifications, ownership arrangements, the purpose of the land and actual use have evolved. So we just want to catch up and make sure that our records really match reality for a start. I'm not sure if this work has actually been done for a very long time, certainly before my time at council. So three things that will help us to understand. So what land we hold and its value, how each parcel was used today, and whether or not it warrants a further look to enable a change to its reserve or ownership status. So there's sort of three parts to that. We'll move on to the next one. Thanks, Lindsay. Next slide.
Next slide.
Yeah. So as Joe mentioned, this kind of sits along some other pieces of work in the space. And last week we introduced the open space and recreation strategy work, which will set the strategic direction for parks and reserves. And then following this piece of work it sort of feeds into a review of the reserves management plan, which is the more detailed management policies for parks and reserves. Ideally, it would follow straight on. It will just depend on how the work program goes in the next little bit, and we may defer that a little bit, but that's kind of the next phase of the work that we'll look to do. Is there any questions on the high level why we're doing it, and sort of how it links to other pieces of work before we move on a little bit more detail.
Yeah, thank you for that. We do have Councillor Holding.
Just on the classification, is it just parks and reserves, or is there, because I noticed there's other land in here that's not included, is there a reason why some land is and isn't?
So we'll talk about the scope in a minute in terms of what's in and what's out and why. So I'm happy to go on to that in a second, a little bit more detail, if that's okay.
Thank you for that. Councillor McCone.
I suppose just clarification of Jeremy's point, the lights of the netball courts and the lookout point, they're strategic, but do they come under this umbrella or are they in two separate entities?
Just in response to that, Councillor McCone, we'll talk a little about the scope in the next slide. Yep. And hopefully that'll answer your question. Right, shall we move on to the scope? So, what's in and what's out? So, we're looking at parks and reserves, the land that's held under the Local Government Act or the Reserves Act, cemeteries and land underneath community buildings that's on a reserved land. And out of scope are things like property that's within the property. General property portfolio land not on reserve, legal roads, 3 water assets, landfills, transfer station, unless they carry reserve values, and forestry blocks and campgrounds. So the assets sit under different legislation or management regimes and are covered by other council work streams. So yeah, the real focus is parks and reserves land managed under LGA. So for example, it could be fee simple land that's actually managed under the LGA. And I think Lookout Point might be one of those examples there for that one. And then land classified under the Reserves Act, which would be like a recreation reserve, scenic reserve, local purpose reserve, managed for reserve purposes.
Thank you for that. Councillor Thorney.
Do we have another project or work stream for the rest of the property portfolio, and particularly legal roads, which there's a lot of those around the district not being used, paper roads and the likes?
There's a lot more other things to look through and look at and recognise there are those other work streams, but I think the recommendation from officers is that we keep this not too big, because it would just be really, really complex, and we just focus on the parks and reserves recreation kind of side, and acknowledge that other work streams will need to follow, and will definitely be taken at steer from councillors in terms of, you know, where that should be prioritised. Okay, we might just move on to the next slide. Thanks, Lindsay. And Lindsay's going to tag team with me today.
Well, probably a 3-way tag team, I think, so that's all right. So let's just, I just want to make sure I've got the right slide up. Yep, cool. Right, just want to explain how we went through the review. So we collated, we got all the reserve land, you know, out of our systems. And then we went through each of those parcels and actually just to try and ascertain, okay, what sort of use does it have? If it's got strong use, then we've classified it as through different sort of colours. So we've had dark greens where we were saying, okay, there is strong use by the community in these areas. The classification of the reserve is correct and fit for purpose. And so that in itself is probably a strong sort of criteria saying, okay, well, you know, there's good information, good knowledge about that. We do go into areas that are light green, and we will show you some examples of these reasonably soon, so just bear with us on that, where we're saying, yes, there is still good use by the community, but we just need to do some sort of some minor sort of changes to make sure that the purpose and the use of that reserve fits with the classification. And we do have some examples where we've had reserves that have been gazetted as, just say example, local purpose reserves, and there's no purpose that's been designated for some of this parcel's land. So these are the parcels land we just need to tidy up.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I suppose, will we get a report on that? Because it's not going to consultation, but will we get a report on the changes in justification? And the other question, will they go through in one parcel or one bulk lot of applications to wherever they have to be applied to get the reserve status changed? But will it be as difficult as, say, Forrester Heights had to go to Parliament?
There's a whole lot of questions in there. So the light green reserves, the light green parcels, we can put that through in a bulk. We have to notify the public, but we don't go to consultation. So that's a simpler piece of work because we're not proposing any changes. The land has already been used for, we're just matching the correct reserve classification with its current use. So we're separating that part of work, and we can do it as a bulk. Stage 2 and orange and red, that will need consultation, and there will be a bulk application to DOC if it's a reserve. Not all the land is a reserve under the Reserves Act.
Thank you. I just have also a comment or a question from our Deputy Mayor before we carry on.
Thank you. I know we touched on it maybe last week around how assessment of current use is quite a challenging exercise, and I think that's there's obviously all sorts of different bits of land looking through this document. So my focus is probably more in the Oamaru space, and I guess I'm just wondering how we've looked at what is genuinely low use, but what is perhaps underused because of barriers either that we've created or that just, I guess, historically exist. Like, there's not, like for a lot of these areas, there's not great signage, there's sort of accessibility issues. And so, yeah, that's probably my concern in the assessment is how much is lack of parking, connections, safety, and whether that's limiting its use, not necessarily meaning, like it could have a lot more potential use. So that's probably just something that I want to, I don't know, what the answer is, or just something I kind of want to flag in that assessment or, understand more about.
That's a fair call, and I think as we go through this process, we'll see areas that have been classified as different sort of colours, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we've made an assessment that there's no future use of those sort of areas, or we've done any sort of snapshot assessment saying, okay, well, how can we utilise these reserves more? This is really, we need to look at what our provision is across the district, and making sure it is what we've got at the moment. Do we need to look at future provision in some other areas, or do we need to retain some of that land for potential future growth? So all those sort of things do come as part of that overall sort of discussion. When we look at our reserve areas, then we do have to look at the capital investment that needs to that needs to occur in the future to make sure we do have reserves that are fit for purpose for the community. But that is a bigger discussion, and that's obviously part of the long-term plan sort of discussions that need to be had in regards to that anyway.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hyde. I just have a couple of other queries and comments that are coming from the council. Councillor Cowles and then Mayor Mel.
Thank you through the chair. I get the dark green, the light green, the orange. For me, it's raised a couple of questions. There's obviously a huge amount, I guess, in my ward, an awful lot of orange, but I guess one of the things that jumped out at me is we've got a couple of cemeteries that are absolutely fine, and then the one in Omarama is in orange, which I'm not really sure how we change the Omarama use or look at that, but there's a few questions like that around various things that I I guess that sort of confused me how that can become an orange one. And so again, it's the question of how we've assessed those things that are orange, and what does orange mean when we say we may have limited reserve value. or opportunities for reclassification or change. Light green and dark green and red have seemed very clear to me, but orange is a wee bit, I'm still not really sure what that might mean for that parcel of land.
Through the chair, look, cemeteries are obviously definite values for us and are important for our heritage and some of our history. So we'd need to look into that, and that's not saying we've got all this information right, but I think we've taken a snapshot. We did go through things we thought quite thoroughly, so there is possibly gaps that may have come through, so we will address those as they're brought to our attention anyway.
No, those are good points raised. We've got Mayor Mel as well with a comment.
Yeah, it is just a comment, and I think just picking up on Brent's and Deputy Mayor's comments, I think just understanding when it comes to how we've classified things, and I get you've got a bit of a process in behind it, what role feedback from councillors has, like is when it comes to individualising, I know that becomes problematic in the way we do things consistently, but I think that there's also a bit of local knowledge in that, so we probably just need to be clear if we're making changes, you know, that there's a wee bit of a process around it, but I think there's going to be some changes that might make absolute sense. And I also guess around the way we talk to the community, it might be teasing out a little bit of that, is this underutilised or could it be different rather than the right now, how it's being used. So we're not just saying that because it's not being used adequately at the moment that we get rid of it, it's a how could we use it more? And I think in that as well, the ones that we think are underutilised in the community that does actually use it, if we do the consultation well, I think that's when those things will become really obvious that actually this little park here might not seem well used, but in fact it really is. So yeah, but some really good work through here too, so thank you.
Yeah, just through the chair, just to let you know that the orange is looking at potentially reclassification as well. So it may be that it's an area of land that, I'm going to be off the cuff here, but just say it's got no classification. So we need to reclassify it because it actually does have use in the community. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of one that we could actually use as an example, but we just want to make sure that we're retaining land that we're looking at that the future protection for our community and for development as well.
Just through the chair, if I may, I think that's really good to know. And if there's places that we've got sitting in orange and it's actually not a conversation as to whether or not it's saleable or something that we should divest ourselves of, whether we treat that slightly differently, because I worry that if it's grouped together in a colour that looks like it's a flick that down the road, that you might create angst that we don't need to create.
That's a good point to make, and it'll help clarify things for the community before there's a adverse reaction. So I think that's just a mitigation kind of factor around that. Councillor Cowles.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to reinforce that because I know the quick numbers that I've done here, we carry 94.3% of this entire review up in the Ahuriri, and 89.6% of the orange. That's quite a concern for a community to see this out in the public without enough information to not get some people rather concerned about what might be happening up in a particular ward. So I appreciate the work that's been done, but it is that, what does that orange actually mean? I don't think there's probably enough there without starting to get a few heckles up.
No, thank you for that. Yes, Mr. Van der Speck.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point that in terms, I think use is a bit of a misnomer. I think the word value is probably better used, and that's value for both the current and the future community. Now, usage is not the only value that reserves are for. There's ecological, biodiversity, and a number of other values as well that just having the land there does form some sort of purpose. So.
Just through the chair, so just to let you know that the orange areas will go through a process of doing further evaluation. So, you know, we need to look at the reserves values, we need to look at some of these other things that come as part of it. That was just a snapshot of where we see things at the moment. So the the engagement with everyone involved is an important part, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we're making decisions now. The decisions will need to be made ahead in the future, but it's getting those conversations going, and I think it's important to have those conversations in place.
No, thank you for that, Mr. Hyde. I think what has been shared and around the council table is just making sure that the conversations are framed in a way that's helpful, to receive helpful feedback, so we don't go down a rabbit hole unnecessarily if things are not framed up correctly for the community. Yeah, we might have our own process, but we just need to respect the community's ability to give positive feedback that is helpful. I have Councillor McCone with a question or a comment.
Look, there's a heap of work gone on this, and I'm really happy that someone's actually looking at it, because it's well overdue for what we need to do. And I'm assuming with 2,500 hectares, that's all rateable, which is another cost we've got on board. But when these decisions are made, it's more of a township and urban thing in my mind, in the respect that we must have green parts and green pieces around the village, that it works, and it's also healthy. It's great. Where I see a big opportunity here, especially in some of the places that have been identified in the orange, if it's well away from a village or a community and next to farmland, why are we paying rates for it? Let's just, if we can, rezone whatever we've got to do and just get rid of it. And whether it means we've got that pays for the cost of doing it, or we can talk to some of the places like Kuria or Otamatata or Hamden or Palmerston, get the locals involved to do the maintenance, so we can actually, I can see a huge opportunity here to cut our cost structure and probably do things a lot better than we're doing it.
No, thank you. Good points. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you. Through the chair, just to pick up on Mr. van der Spek's point with regards to value, I think when we're talking to our community, we've got to be very careful. I think the default position when you come to value is price. And I think we've got to be really clear on the narrative that we're talking value in a different format and a different way, because I totally agree. I think our green spaces have huge value, but when it comes to looking at making changes, you know, as I say, the default position for a lot of people is you talk about value, we're going to sell it off. So I think we've just got to be really careful in our communications on that one.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. van der Spek.
Yeah, sorry, just in terms of Councillor McCone's comments, reserve land, if it's gazetted correctly, is not rateable.
Right, so just to, you've seen the colours. We're just going to give a wee bit of demonstration of what we've done from an online mapping point of view. You've seen in the workshop agenda hard copies of the areas, but what it does limit is some of the information that's coming behind it. So we're just going to pop into a couple of areas and we'll have a look, just to give a bit of an overview of what we've been able to do, because I think some of that will help formulate some of those decisions and discussions that we need to have later. So just bear with me. Right, so we'll zip to Hamden, because I think Hamden is one of the areas that it's got a volume of land parcels. Okay, and as you can see in through here, we've got a mixture. We've got some dark green, which obviously around that coastal sort of environment. We've got some light green, which indicates that we need to do some potential rechanges in the classification to make sure it's fit for purpose. We've got areas of red, which we as a discussion with the community to say, okay, well, do we still need these, or do we need to look at investment? Do we need to look at some of those sort of do we need to look at better use, or are we considering potentially that we return it back to DOC or other parties? So we do need to do a lot of investigation into both the orange and red areas, but it just shows in Hamden just the scale of some of the land holdings we've got. Now we will be able to look into, we'll zoom into one of these, and I'll let's just pick on that area there. So while you can't necessarily get the aerial underneath, hopefully can you see that? So we've put some notes in beside it. So we've got that it is a recreation reserve, okay, that particular bit of land. So it's been gazetted right. We've made some notes and some of the information that we've gathered, and this is from information that's online about any information that we're aware of. So this one here is classified recreation, invested by that Gazette notice in 1954, and it's part of the current campground. So, these things we just need to make sure that we've got correct. We look at the bigger picture for our communities and to make sure that whatever decisions we make, we're making with the right intent and the right values. So I went through that dark green, we do feel that there is strong use by the communities in some of these areas, and light green I would be reasonably certain there is, and some of the other areas are, as probably Councillor McCone reiterated, as grazing areas have been grazed by people, by families, by local community members. So there is some discussions we need to look at from the wider picture on what we're delivering, where we're delivering it, and how we're delivering it.
So just through the chair, and I'm guessing this is part of the next unpacking stage, is do we take into account things like, where we want people building, that kind of thing, like how we actually plan our townships and things? Because I look at some of the things that are probably very close to the coastline and whether or not there's any real value in that, or do we leave that decision to the market? I just guess what is our kind of role as the planner of our community. And I guess as well, the stepped out approach, like obviously if you did free up a whole lot of land all at one stage and flooded a market with a huge amount of things, what that does to the private people trying to sell their properties in that market as well. So just a bit of an understanding of how we approach that kind of thing.
So part of stage 2 will also be identifying whether it's rural or urban. A lot of the land on the east side of the railway is actually rural land, so it probably is not subdividable anyway. So, and yes, we have taken into consideration the erosion potential, and so the land to the west, reserve land to the west, has been kept for that very purpose. Yep.
Just before we move on, we've just got a couple of queries from this side. Councillor McCone and then Councillor Schlack.
Based on those last comments, and if land is decided that we don't need it or anything else, do we have by law to offer it back to those that gifted it, or under the Reserves Act, or how does all that work? Where I'm coming from is we may have parcels of land that are costing us more in rates to actually run than they're actually receivable. So I'm trying to work out how we get rid of it.
So a part of stage 2 again will be looked closer where the land came from. In Hampden, there's a lot of it that came from the Crown directly. So again, it's reserve land or it's municipal land, so we own it. We just have to check in with LINZ about disposing of it first. If there is some land that we suspect is come via rating sales, so we actually need to actually dig into where it came from before we are free to sell it. Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Schlack.
Thank you, and through the chair, first of all, great work here. Good, you've managed to put a report together of 5 pages and it's very clear, so well done. It's a record to be broken. First of all, just for clarification for everybody, that map that is being shown at the moment and shared, that is accessible to the public, so they can go in there and review it prior to the consultation. Is that correct, or do we need special access for that?
As part of those next stages, we'll be working with the committee here through working group. We will share this information. When we go out to consultation, there'll be no reason why we can't make this information available. So there's nothing that's secret or being hidden. It's a matter of we want to make sure we're engaging with our communities in the right way, and that's an important part of this whole process, to make sure we are doing it right, we're doing it fair, and they've got the same amount of information as what we've got as available as well.
So just to add to that, we really value the work of a subgroup in the space as well, to sort of, for councillors to, I guess, sense check some of the stuff from a, with your community lens on board. This is just an officer stab first attempt, and we recognise there's still more work to be done to make sure that it's kind of roughly right to have that conversation with the community.
No, that's a really good point. You had another question?
Yes, I do. So we've seen on the previous slide, as in how areas or parcels are being used. My question is, how do you determine that? Because there's many of them, obviously, throughout the whole district. So how are you actually going to go about determining how particular parcels or areas are used? And I realise that there is going to be a request for community input in that, but is the community input around that to get feedback on how the areas are used? Or is that actually the community feedback for what we are proposing that is going to happen in terms of classifications of these parcels?
It's important to make sure that before we go down any formal process that we are pretty comfortable with those decisions that need to be made. So if we haven't got the right information, we'd expect the community to let us know, because in the end there's no point in making the wrong decision, because we can spend a lot of time going down rabbit hole, for choice of words, for very little return. We have to make sure that whatever we're doing in this space is actually providing the right value and the right resources, the right areas for our communities, and all we've taken is a snapshot of the knowledge that we've got, and we'd definitely we'd be reasonably accurate on it, but that's not saying we've got it all. So, and I've been caught out in the past just underestimating just the value of some reserves, and not thinking they get a lot of use, and actually the community has come back and said, no, we do use these reserves reasonably well, reasonably frequently. So yeah, the community has to be part of this sort of discussion, this movement forward anyway.
And just to add to that, I think this is the start of the conversation with the community, and I think that this is, like, we need to work with the community boards and communities whoever's really interested in this to change the colours if we need to. We want to make sure that we're all on the same page. I guess you've got to start somewhere. You can't really do it from clean slate, but if you've got sort of a start of a conversation, you can build on that to get the best outcome.
Great, thank you. We've got Ms O'Neill and then Councillor Thornley.
I just wanted to add to that conversation. There is a massive amount of work that's gone on, and appreciation for the mahi and the report that's come is great. So thank you so much. I think what's really important, and one thing we've been talking about as a directorate as well, is the comments that have come from council previously about being part of the journey as opposed to receiving what is a complete body of work. And so this is essentially the starting point of work that we really need council to be involved in and support the process for, and to be aware of before we even engage in any community consultation or any identification of consultation needs. So it really is at the, as Victoria said, the starting point of that journey, to bring you along on that.
Thank you. I have Councillor Thowning, Councillor Cowles, and then Councillor McCone. Did you have your hand up?
I've got, going through the maps there's three things that sort of popped up that I could see could potentially cause a consultation to become a bit more controversial than necessary. One was what's the idea behind including the camping grounds as orange? Because according to the criteria on the previous slide, they've got high use, they've got the right classification, and the various other things it appears to me they meet. I'd also wonder whether some of those parks and the likes of There's a couple of parks in Otamatata that are red. I wonder if maybe they should be bumped back to orange. And then there's also a section next to the War Memorial in Mahino, which is red, and that should probably be light green because it's definitely got the wrong classification. But I don't think we should probably be selling that particular parcel. So those are my top 3 red flags that I wonder if they might just be a bit of a change or but I'm particularly wondering about the camping grounds in particular because they're very high use, get a lot of use.
Yeah, just to probably ask the last 2, we'll definitely address any of those sort of gremlins in the system. We have gone through it a reasonable amount of time, so not saying we've still missed bits and pieces. In regards to the campgrounds and the forestry blocks, we have kept them orange generally because of the fact that most of the campgrounds are designated recreation reserves, and camping activity is an activity that is allowed on it. However, there is also we need to look at what potentially the future use could be for those campgrounds. So the community may find actually we would rather use that for a sports field or playground or whatever moving forward. So they've been classified as orange for those sort of purposes. Is that the fact is we may need to look at what the future use is for each of those communities that have campgrounds in them. So not saying that the current activity is not suitable, because it is, but it's just a matter of saying, is that the right activity moving ahead? And we have tried to keep those quite separate because they are bigger discussions to have and important discussions to have as well.
Can I just add to the camping one? As we've just talked about, this is the start of a conversation with councillors and with community. In the case of the Lakes camping areas, it's recreation land from DOC vested in council. There is and it's heavily subsidised by rates, which we all know. There is a possibility that council could decide that DOC are better off managing that instead of us. And that potentially is a conversation you may choose to have.
I just wonder if we're creating a problem where there isn't one, or perhaps the risk of that, given the history of it. In particular, it was the Waitaki Lakes committee under the likes of Sid Hurst, and there's quite a lot of history there that I think it needs to be.
There is a lot of history, but council keeps on talking about the amount that we subsidise it as well. So we'll put it out there. Do you want to have a conversation or not? So, if there is a feeling that we shouldn't be having that conversation, great, we change the colours. But, ultimately, there's a few, straw horses in here to just test the waters.
I think Councillor Thaurin has just given some advice in terms of acknowledging the history and the key criteria that is quite important to them before we make things more complicated than necessary, given the complexity of this work already. Councillor Cowles and then Councillor McCoon.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I suppose of a similar vein, I'm actually quite open to have a discussion around how perhaps that they're managed and looked after in the future. I don't have an issue with that, but I think it is something we have to be very careful with community-wise. If we put this out there in the wrong manner, it's going to be all arms up. And my other concern around that is acknowledging that the people that we need to engage with are not actually our ratepayers around that to some degree, and that's always been our difficulty around the campgrounds. The economic benefit that they bring, particularly up to the ward, over an entire year is quite, and it's growing. Well, I know in general it's growing, but yeah, I think for me, it is a high risk one, and I'm wondering whether it almost warrants its own discussion again that we had. I know we had this a number of years ago. It must have been, it was before my time, so it must have been 6 or 7 years ago, around how they were managed and how perhaps we could look at doing it 12 years ago. Well, there we go, shows how long I was on the community board for. But yeah, that, looking at that and going, how can we make them more viable and stuff, but I think that's almost a separate question to what we're looking at here, but I'm not sure how that sits. But I think that's a very high risk discussion.
Could I just also add, with the commercial campgrounds, the ones with a lease, we're obligated where there's a lease to renew a lease when it comes up for renewal or to agree to an assignment. So there's never that opportunity, or when a lessee is trying to sell it, they're expecting council to give approval to sell it. There's never the opportunity to go to the community and say, is this the best use for the land? And that's actually a requirement of the Reserves Act that we do that. So this is an opportunity, and that's why they're orange. We say, look, in the future when the lease runs out, and that could be 30, 40 years from now, are we happy that this land keeps being used as a camping ground? So that's what we're trying to ask the community, not that we're trying to terminate the lease, because we can't. Yeah.
I think it's more the council-run ones, the big ones, that there is no lease. It is us, and it is our responsibility. So it's more those ones that I think are the controversial ones. I don't think, completely with the other ones if there's a lease underneath them, but we also have to respect that that's someone's livelihood and business sitting underneath it.
Good points. I did have Councillor McCone and then Councillor Thorney.
Well, there's 2 or 3 good points there, and as Brent says, if you look at what happened in Cromwell and the furore they had with their camping ground, how that got tightened up as things changed. So I think there's 2 things we should learn out of that: is the leases not be 30 or 40 years, perhaps a 10-year time frame with a right of renewal in amongst it, so we don't cross that bridge. That's just my thoughts. Secondly, as far as Finn mentioned with the plantings lots around Lake Benmore, Aviemore, but there's also a lot done around Corridor, Wahimo. As they did roads up and everything else, the piece that was cut off became riding reserve, and we've got planted trees and everything else. So that's, I don't know how we crossed that one over. And the third point I'd make is, I notice a lot of the coastal stuff is either red or green. Can we walk away from some of that? Can we gift it back to Lynn's or anybody else? Because in a past life, when I was doing this stuff, a lot of the titles are actually under the sea. So we need to be probably chasing that up as well.
Just through the chair, that'll be just part of those discussions that we can have later on in regards to, the ongoing discussions about those parcels of land. Definitely it's an option, but it's a matter of looking at what that future provision we need to have for our communities and having the right areas in the right place and allowing for growth as well.
Thank you for that. Councillor Thorney. Councillor Thorney, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, just along, my next one I was going to query was along the lines of use as well. The one around Western Park, that's one where the use has increased through the disc golf, but also it's quite low maintenance, being mowed by sheep, and the history of it as well, with how the Western Progress League built that park and that too. So if we could include that, and if it must remain orange, but I'd prefer to see that dark green personally.
Through the chair, it's a matter of having those discussions, and in the end, when we do those reserve values, measures, the matrix, that doesn't necessarily mean that, well, it could mean that some of these areas do change. And so it's taken that to stage 2 to do that further evaluation. And that's not saying that's going to stay that colour forever, but it's saying, okay, well, how do we measure some of these things in a bit more of in a fair and reasonable manner?
Oh, absolutely. I take your point, and this is just going to consultation too. But and I also note Victoria mentioned there's a requirement under the Reserves Act to review all of this, but there are a lot of reserves that are dark green.
Just about that Western Park, I think we've identified it as orange from memory. It's a fee simple piece of land. So we have an opportunity to actually exchange a reserve, doing a reserve exchange. So it's not just a matter of reclassification, actually going to DOC and say, we'd like to shift a reserve from here to there. So we think there probably is values, I think you're correct, but it's to identify it as actually an exchange of a reserve.
Oh, so light green might be more appropriate.
No, so you're actually putting a reserve value over that land, so we're giving up our right to sell that and do something else with it. So that's a discussion, and that'll come through in stage 2.
Was the change of classification not light green?
No, if there's a change of classifications, there's already a classification there, it just needs further refinement. So the orange for that western one, fee simple land, so could be sold in a moment's notice. However, we're saying that there is reserve values in it, but we go through that matrix just to make sure, and it may be that we say, okay, for a parcel of land we may have somewhere, we don't want that, we'll revoke that status, or we'll have that discussion with DOC to say, okay, we'll swap that recreation reserve from there, and we can put it through there through a formal sort of process.
Yeah, I'm just mindful that we've got like 15 minutes left, and it seems like we're just kind of going through a lot of the outcomes anyway, and the feedback is naturally coming to fulfil what the purpose of the workshop is. You can see a hand up on this side, Councillor Holding.
Just on a few of the maps, there's some white keys. I'm just trying to figure out what they're for. I got a bit confused when I was reading through the colours. There's some white keys on some of the maps. Colour code.
Is that on the PDF maps?
Yeah.
Just ignore it. Just
I'm just going to consult and
yeah.
Do you want to add an extra colour to the...
You could invest.
And so we've already been touching on stage 2 anyway, but if we just jump into Omarama, we can just give you some of the reasons behind what's going on in the conversations. If you want to go to the river block.
This one? Okay.
No,
This one?
yeah. So this block of land, it has, it's been assessed as, in stage 1, as it doesn't have any public access. It's got high ecological values, and so we don't feel that we're actually capable of managing some of these values. You've got endangered species and declining species on this land. So DOC already have a relationship with the leasee, and we would be looking at not selling this and earning a profit, but actually disposing it and putting it back into a pair of safe hands. So that sort of stuff will come through in stage 2. True, it doesn't cost us much to maintain it, and we're earning a small income off it, but we're looking at preserving those ecological values, and the best place to do that. So that's what's skewing the Omarama side of things. The same leasee also has a lease on that big orange block there, which is recreation land. So we want to have a conversation for the community. When this lease comes up, is there a little piece that you want? Can it be better used for something else? We did notify the public before this lease was undertaken, there were changes and conditions to allow the public to have some access. But in the future, what does the public want to do with that in terms of recreation values? And so that's what that question is going to be, and to go out to the community with. You've got a lot of walkway values in through here. Light green, there's a classification of it's the Omarama Hall. The orange at the back there's actually and this will be identified in stage 2, it's actually not council land, although there was an exchange of land with DOC in the past. That exchange hasn't been registered with LINZ, and now we've got a problem with trying to take ownership of that land without spending a lot of money. So this is the sort of stuff that will be put down into stage 2. Is it worth pursuing that, or do we just hand it back to DOC? Again, the Park Lane one, so this is fee simple land. Don't know, it's been used as a park, so that would be managed under the Local Government Act. Don't know why it's fee simple, would have to actually dig in and see, was it obtained under the Public Works Act? What are obligations? Do the community use it more than we realise? So that's the sort of things, again, that will be outlined. And what does it cost? What does it cost to maintain? There's obviously no revenue. Can recreation values be obtained close in other locations? Yeah, that's probably about it, yeah.
Okay, is there any feedback in regards to these Councillor Thorney. And then Councillor McCone.
Yeah, that was just one of the ones I mentioned before. Orange might be a less provocative colour for that one potentially. It's looking at it, it does have a lot of established trees. It looks like a park, and it's surrounded by residential houses. So probably assume, well, it might be good to look at it. Red might be a bit strong.
And that's fine, you know, we can always relook at it. You know, we still have to assess these against the values, so that doesn't necessarily mean things can't change.
Cool. We have Councillor McCone and then Mayor Mel.
Yeah, if we go back a slide to that larger area of land, in that scenario, we've got all this recreation land round the Marama area, and then that is farmland. I know that land up there, there's quite a bit of, you know, I think we're very lucky to be getting any return out there, and anything that covers the return, that covers the rate cost, I think would be a bonus. I think I'll be very wary of returning ground to DOC if we have to, because DOC does not pay rates, and then you open a whole lot of another can of worms, especially inside a residential area or a growth area, of what you can and can't do in that area.
Thank you for that. Mayor Mel and then Councillor Slack.
Probably going to be doing this in the wrap up, but there's certainly a few skill sets or just knowledge around the table, particularly in things like the Ahuriri ward, with it being quite a big portion of land area this report covers in that space around your working group. So I think I'm certainly hearing that there's some interest to work with you and to kind of help with that process. So just putting that out there for councillors that do have feelings. I think it'd be really great to see some of you jump into that space if you could.
No, that's awesome. Councillor Schleck.
Yeah, just accidentally following up on what Mayor Mel just said. I'm sitting here, to be quite honest, a little bit bewildered because there are so many parcels to look at, and if I hear the comments around the table, is clearly of people that have way more local knowledge than I have and ever will. So for me, it is a matter of really finding out what the community wants. And I noticed that on your timeline, you've got engagement with the community board scheduled for December. And I just wonder, because I think those are the really local people that, you know, the members of the community board that know the area, know the people around there. And I just wonder whether December in that schedule is too late, even if it is from a point of view providing our community board members with access to these maps, and we make them aware that they are available and start to get some feedback, because as I said here, honestly, I'm bewildered by it all. And for me to go through parcel and parcel and parcel and interpreting what it might mean, I think that work has to be divided by ward and then by communities. The other part is, while I'm here, is if I look at these maps, if it is at all possible, and I don't see why not, is that we actually get aerial photograph behind it. Because what's the point of discussing an area that we might sell and turns out to be a very steep valley? We're wasting our time in that. So we need some visual representation, as in what does one parcel actually represent in terms of value, to use a word, because otherwise we might be wasting our time. So if that's possible to do, I think that would help us all.
Yeah, I think there's some good points there that Councillor Slack has included in key considerations for the community engagement piece, as well as the involvement of community board meetings members.
So we're going to cover that in the timeline. So we are engaging with the community boards in October as well. So we're having a catch up with community boards on, I think, the 5th and 12th of October, and with a later one, I think, in December. So we are going to be reaching out to community boards. In relation to the question about providing a bit more aerial layer. We can look at how we can refine that to get the right information, because I think we do need to make sure that you can get an understanding of that lens behind some of this land, and definitely the colours there, when we're looking at it just from colours, is quite strong. Yeah.
Thank you. I think Councillor Schleck is advising the entry point for the community board to be a wee bit earlier, for them to feel part of, like the process, and whether there could be consideration, if it's appropriate, for them to be included possibly in the working group as a mechanism for them to feedback, possibly.
Yep. Absolutely, to take the steer in that. So we sort of, I guess, we want to maybe do a little bit more work as officers as well in the next month to clarify a few things. Establish a bit of a subgroup and bring the community boards in if they'd like to do that. But the initial plan was that we'd do that high-level briefing in early October with the community boards, and then from there work with them through into December in terms of refining things further. Is it okay to move on to the next steps? We've got one more question over there.
Yeah, I'm just mindful we've got like 5 minutes left. We'll take one more question from Councillor McCone, and then we might just do a wee wrap up. We do know that there needs to be a bit of a subgroup and a sequencing that needs to happen from today, so it won't be the last of the inquiries coming through. Councillor McCone.
It's great, the consultations with Ahuriri and Wahimo, but what about poor old Corridor? We're out in the cold again. We get left behind. So is it... I'm quite happy to help.
You can be in there too, don't worry.
Okay. Maybe a bit of clarification here. I do notice, and also on the screen, October, November 2026, elected members subgroup meets, and I get it from that. That is the subgroup that you emailed about, Veronica, and we have our first meeting tomorrow. I don't necessarily read in there that includes the community board members, and I think the community board members really have to be included in October, November. Leaving it till December, I think, is too late.
Just to clarify, there are a few things moving here at the same time. So the subgroup tomorrow is the open space strategy, and this is an additional piece of work we're doing here for the Landholdings review. So we'll probably look to establish a slightly different subgroup for that work, depending on who's interested in that space. And very happy, if you're comfortable to do so, to bring on the community board representation through that work. This is just an initial kind of idea that we had as officers in terms of our...
Councillor McCone is interested.
For Corridor, that's awesome, thank you.
No, thank you for that. I think we're going to wrap it up from now. It's been really important that the elected members have had an opportunity to provide some initial feedback from that, and they have provided some key considerations for you to consider as an extra layer that sits underneath the colour-coded metrics that you have provided. So we do ask that you do take that into serious consideration. It will help pipeline the community engagement piece much more easier to help on board and support, at that important stage as well. And it also sounds like, did we want to propose any initial names for the subgroup for this work stream? It sounds like Councillor Thowning is interested as well. Councillor Cowles, it's important to have representative from the different wards as well. Councillor Schlack, Councillor McCone, and Deputy Mayor Ryan. That's a nice subgroup there that's available. Thank you very much for putting your names forward for that. And then just not to underestimate the value of the community board members. So as you are sequencing the different briefings and meetings with the subgroup, do consider them. They're an important piece of this in helping to align the communication and the feedback from those particular communities. I think that might be about it just for now, but do know that there will be more information that will come to us in due course. So thank you very much for the intensive work that has been done already, and thank you for the feedback from the elected members and our mayor. And we look forward to hearing more feedback as we go through the timeline. So thank you very much, everybody, for today's workshop.